I brought my wife's father to catch her cheating with her lover and then disappeared completely as Christmas approached, a time that normally fills me with joy. I found myself in a difficult situation. Life has not been kind to me despite my best efforts to be kind to others. Some might say welcome to the club, my friend, but the situation has become truly depressing. I used to think that infidelity was mostly a man's thing, but now I see that women are capable of it as well. I used to think that infidelity was mostly a man's thing, but now I see that women are capable of it too. I don't want to make sweeping generalizations, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to take a look at my own life and see if I can handle it. Speaking from my own experience, the situation unfolded in a way that made it seem like my girlfriend didn't like him at all, but after installing a hidden camera, the truth became clear. It became obvious that when I went to work, he would sneak into my apartment and get involved with my girlfriend. This guy used to live next door, but he got arrested and needed a place to stay for a few weeks. I often wondered why he was always hanging around us. After I kicked him out, he started showing up in places we were, and I wondered who was telling the truth. It felt like he had some kind of GPS tracker and was constantly watching us, but eventually the truth came out. It happened one morning as I was finishing my shower and getting ready for work. My girlfriend was also showering. All of a sudden her phone got a text message notification. In a normal situation I wouldn't have paid much attention, but my girlfriend had a new phone and the ringtone was unfamiliar. I checked the sender, and it was Patrick, my former roommate who had just gotten out of jail. My former roommate who had just gotten out of jail. My former roommate who had just gotten out of jail. Prison. My former roommate who just got out of prison. We became friends in high school when we both lived in Queens. We had a lot of memories and experiences together. Patrick lived with me for a few months before his prison time, but things changed when my girlfriend moved in. After he got out, he came back and stayed with us for 2 more months. Unfortunately, we had a fight and I asked him to leave. He was supposed to stay for 2 weeks, but it turned into 2 months. I paid almost $2. The lack of personal space made it difficult to communicate with my girlfriend as he slept on the couch in the living room. In January, we planned to sign a new lease and move to a better, more expensive apartment next month. It is important to note that Patrick and my girlfriend did not have a strong relationship. Temporary, so I was surprised when I saw that he was texting her that morning. I didn't even know they were texting. A notification popped up on my phone screen showing their conversation. My name is Caleb and my girlfriend and I knew a Patrick, and she didn't know any other person with that name, plus her friend Patrick who I didn't know about. Asking about another Caleb seemed like a big coincidence. I realized she was actually talking to my former neighbor who I kicked out 2 weeks ago because of his long stay. I couldn't imagine a connection between my girlfriend and Patrick, especially since she supported my decision to cut him out of our lives, but the feeling of unease lingered, suggesting something was wrong. The idea of romance never crossed my mind. Maybe they went out together for a smoke or some other activity. He had potential for other things, but was fixated on becoming a rapper and spending money on studio time. He always returned to the streets dealing illegal substances when he lost his job, but even there, he was unsuccessful, getting caught. I grew up in a mostly disadvantaged part of Queens where my parents are still happily married. I faced financial struggles as a child, but I was never hungry. I am grateful to have grown up in a diverse community that exposed me to different cultures. Most of my friends during my formative years were of African descent. I didn't think I would have a relationship with someone of another race, as all my previous girlfriends were African American, but fate had other plans. It all started about 1.5 years ago when I met my current girlfriend while working as a courier. We exchanged witty remarks and I jokingly asked her out, fully expecting a rejection. I became a delivery driver, which eventually led to our relationship. She is a fantastic young professional in her early 22s with a beautiful figure that accentuated her beauty when we first met. I'm a simple person who doesn't need much in life, just enough money to cover the rent and a loyal girlfriend who won't cheat on me while I work hard. At the beginning, I thought I had found everything in my current girlfriend and I cherished the time we spent together. After 7 months of dating, I fully trusted her. It felt like we could build a stable future together. At the time, I had a roommate named Patrick, but the lease was in my name. Only Patrick had bad credit and no rental history, so he couldn't be on the lease. My lease ended after 8 months, and my girlfriend's lease was tied to her neighbor's. We both agreed to find a new, better place to live in about 4 months when her lease was up. It was our next step in our plans as a couple. She wanted to live in the East Village or Lower East Side, similar to her current area. I lived in Washington Heights, which she didn't like. Luckily her job was in the East Village, so it matched her desire to be close to work. My delivery job didn't tie me to a specific location, but I had to consider the apartment my partner wanted. Even though it was $1.5 million more than my current one, a one-bedroom was about $3. The plan was for her to move in with me and my neighbor temporarily after her lease ended. After my lease ended, we moved into the apartment she liked. Patrick had dreamed of musical fame since he was 16, but it hadn't happened yet. Despite pouring money into studio time, his music went largely unheard, and he was stuck in a frustrating cycle of avoiding steady jobs and opting to buy and sell candy. After he was fired, he resorted to selling candy on the street to make ends meet, often getting arrested. This pattern had been going on since he was 16, and I felt foolish for letting him get so close to me. Predictably, 4 months before the end of his lease, he was arrested and went to jail. He got arrested and went to jail. I was the only one on the lease, so I was left with the rent. Despite his multiple arrests, I still let him stay with me. Unfortunately, he continued to live in jail. I hoped he would change and get a job like mine, but he was determined to make it in the music industry. In short, as soon as my girlfriend's lease ended, she moved in with me and we started a new chapter. As a couple, we lived together for a while, but our peaceful life was disrupted when Patrick got an early release from prison a month later. Surprisingly, when Patrick returned, his stuff was gone from our shared apartment. Patrick had nowhere to go and asked to stay with me for 2 weeks while he sorted things out and moved in with relatives. Given our limited space, I hesitated that I told him that our 2-bedroom apartment was already small for a couple. I hesitated to tell him that our 2-bedroom apartment was already small for me and my girlfriend and that adding another person would make it worse, but after talking to my girlfriend, we agreed that she had never met Patrick before and that her knowledge of him was limited to what I had shared with her. Surprisingly, he moved in that same day. I made it clear that my friend's agreement was based on him only staying for 2 weeks. He agreed, promising to be inconspicuous. Surprisingly, within a week he adapted to being a polite couch surfer, not invading our space, and returning when we were getting ready for bed. Although we rarely saw him, we knew he was there and appreciated his efforts to keep his stuff tidy, so we didn't even notice for the first 2 weeks, but by the 3rd and 4th weeks I would occasionally come home late from work to find him watching TV with my girlfriend, which was fine. At first I thought he had a friendly relationship with my girlfriend, but they barely talked when I was around, and despite our best efforts to keep things clean, our tiny space still felt cramped and stifling. As the 5th week approached, I became increasingly concerned that Patrick had extended his stay beyond the promised 2 weeks that I felt for my girlfriend and assured her that he would leave as promised one night while I was away. I wanted to apologize on Patrick's behalf and ease the tension in the air. Even though Patrick hadn't caused any problems between us, the cramped living conditions seemed to be affecting our closeness. It had been 4 weeks since we had been intimate and I felt the need to address it. I wanted to talk to my girlfriend about Patrick overstaying his initial 2-week promise. I expected her to be supportive or at least receptive, but she just turned away and went to bed as if I was in her way. Upon reflection, I remembered that for the first 3 days after Patrick moved in, our sex life was normal, but on the 4th day she began to refuse intimacy. Considering that my girlfriend was usually active in these moments, I thought her behavior might be due to feeling uncomfortable in the last few weeks. I was struck by the fact that for the first 3 days after Patrick's arrival, our sex life was unusually noisy, almost as if she was doing it on purpose. Strangely enough, from the 4th day on, my self-esteem increased significantly. My girlfriend often refused any intimacy, often using Patrick's presence as an excuse. It was strange because she hadn't been so careful in the first 3 days. Even though Patrick was in the living room I didn't think much of it, but after 6 weeks I expressed my dissatisfaction to Patrick and told him his stay was over. It bothered me that my girlfriend continued to refuse intimacy because of him. I noticed his lingering presence and it seemed like a deliberate form of retaliation. Almost 2 months had passed, and she was still using the excuse of Patrick's presence. Almost 2 months had passed, and she was still using the excuse of Patrick's presence to refuse intimacy. Almost 2 months had passed, and she was still using the excuse of having a guest in our apartment. I reminded Patrick that he had promised to leave a month ago, but he cleverly shifted the blame to other issues and convinced me to let him stay another week. I also remembered several instances when both Patrick and my girlfriend were absent for long periods of time at the same time, and it made me feel uncomfortable. There was one incident when I decided to come home from work early because I was feeling unwell. My girlfriend usually came home at 5:30 p.m. when I suddenly heard a noise. Suddenly I heard a commotion in the apartment and I feared a burglary since neither Patrick nor my girlfriend were usually home at that time. I rushed inside. I saw the TV on. Patrick pretended to be engrossed in it, but his behavior was unusual and uncomfortable, obvious to any observer. Meanwhile, the sound of running water indicated that my girlfriend was in the shower. This strange situation raised suspicions that something fishy was going on between them, although I had no concrete evidence of her presence in the apartment. The apartment at that time was enough to raise suspicions, and I was sure that my girlfriend was not the type to engage in such behavior. So to address the situation, I asked my girlfriend about her early return home. Her answer was that she had taken half a day off from work. Her explanation did not convince me, and I was dissatisfied due to my poor health that day. I did not delve into the topic as deeply as I should have, but I could not shake the suspicion of a connection between them. The Next day, my girlfriend unexpectedly brought up the topic of my conversation. To my surprise, she had acted as a go-between for him, suggesting that we extend his stay for another week or more and not pressure him since we were leaving the apartment in January. I found it strange that he was using her as an intermediary to extend his stay with us. He had originally promised only 2 weeks and I felt it was important for him to keep his word. I had already endured a considerable amount of time without my usual surroundings and intimacy, and now she was suddenly taking his side. At times it had felt like I was on my own in my stance, and I had feared that if we let him he would become a permanent freeloader, constantly sleeping on the couch to avoid his rent obligations. I sometimes wished he was back in jail. He had a knack for finding trouble in record time and a tendency to put himself in it. This all happened in November, the same week we were looking for the perfect wedding ring together. It was a well-planned event that we had been preparing for. Several weeks, involving her in the selection of the ring to ensure that she would be absolutely delighted and proud to wear it for the rest of her life, or at least that was the plan. We had discussed the idea of getting married even before she moved in with me, and we had meticulously planned it for weeks. Our grand plan included signing a lease for a new apartment in December. I had decided to propose on Valentine's Day in January, knowing her love for romantic gestures. The night we went to get wedding rings, we finally had a chance to be intimate after a 7-week hiatus. It was a special reward for buying the rings and a gentle reminder of the intimacy we had missed due to the guest in the living room the following week. It only intensified my longing for the bond we shared, $500 from my savings, which totaled $41. The very next day, my girlfriend reminded me that it had been almost 2 months since Patrick had moved in with us, and this revelation caught me off guard. That evening, I met with Patrick and firmly told him that he had only one day to find another place to live. He claimed that he had nowhere to go, which infuriated me. I explained to him that it was not my problem. At that moment my girlfriend came out of the bedroom and our voices grew louder. I strongly urged Patrick to stop relying on me and find a place to live or turn to his family for help. It was clear that he would not be able to make it. It was clear that his relatives did not want him around because of his unreliability, and even his acquaintances in our social circle, who turned out to be of African descent, did not want to accept him. The confrontation escalated and almost became physical. I decided to contact the authorities to make sure they would handle this situation properly by putting him behind bars. I expressed my disappointment and made it clear that his lack of gratitude prevented me from helping him. He left that evening but returned the next morning to pick up his things. By the end of November it was clear that he was out of my life. There were rumors that he had taken refuge in a rundown house about 2 miles from me, which was not surprising given the lack of support from his acquaintances, but it puzzled me that he did not seek refuge with his relatives instead of living in a place that could put him back in prison. It was in the first week of December that I discovered why he was so determined to stay. I was in a bar with my girlfriend when I saw him discreetly leave the room. This scenario repeated itself several times in different places, and I later found out that my girlfriend had been exchanging text messages with him. This discovery made me wonder if he was tracking our location via GPS, as he often showed up in places we were trying to avoid. Trying to make sense of this disturbing situation, I mentioned it to my girlfriend. To my surprise, she jokingly admitted that she also found his behavior disturbing and creepy, and I learned that she had given him our location so that they could secretly meet and have intimate relations in my car while I waited in a restaurant, completely unaware of their actions. This incident occurred during our second visit to her parents' home. In upstate New York, the first visit had been uncomfortable because of her father's disapproval of me. My friend informed me that he preferred that she marry a man with a higher education, not someone like me. While his words were different, his intentions were clear. I realized that this was the message he wanted to convey to her father, an arrogant and irritable college professor. I didn't like him, and it was obvious that he thought his daughter deserved someone better. Despite my friend's efforts to get her father to accept me, it was clear that we would not see eye to eye. I tried to be polite to her parents, but they proved to be quite difficult. They expressed a desire to visit my friend and see where she was living now, but she insisted that they wait until we moved into a nicer apartment in the East Village or Lower East Side. We were planning to sign a lease for a new apartment in 2 weeks, just days before Christmas. The following week, I found a message from Patrick on my friend's newly purchased cell phone. Without knowing the nature of their communication, I saved a record of the message. My main feeling was one of confusion rather than suspicion, as I had never thought of my girlfriend as someone who would betray my trust. As she finished her shower, I wanted to capture the text message as evidence. As I drove to work, my thoughts were preoccupied with the dynamics of the relationship between my girlfriend and Patrick. I had many questions about his messages, especially the ones about my work schedule that raised suspicions about a possible connection between them. I remembered how vocal she used to be during our intimate moments when Patrick lived in my apartment. The lack of intimacy she attributed to Patrick's presence also weighed on my mind. I recalled numerous occasions when I returned home unexpectedly to find both of them in the house. I thought about his sudden appearances in various places and her unexplained disappearances for short periods of time. I struggled with my feelings of worthlessness, anger, and confusion all day long, hoping desperately that my conclusions were wrong, because my life revolved around this woman, and without her, I might have moved to Florida by now. A friend in Florida had made me an enticing offer 3 months ago, $1,500 per day after taxes to transport cars in a certain region of the United States. However, as my relationship with my girlfriend deepened, I understood her reluctance to leave New York and her family. I made the resolute decision to stay in my apartment. On the same day I received a text notification. I decided to verify my suspicions. To do so, I decided to purchase a pair of high-quality hidden video cameras with excellent resolution. The plan was to discreetly install them in my bedroom and living room to remotely monitor the situation via and receive real-time updates on my phone. I carefully placed the cameras in their designated locations. I connected them to the Wi network to ensure uninterrupted communication with my mobile device. Before leaving for work the next morning, I carefully checked the cameras to ensure they remained hidden and working optimally. I strategically hid the cameras in various locations and then left with my phone to ensure it was synchronized. Typically my girlfriend and I had different work schedules. She left for work at 7 o'clock in the morning and I left at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I expected several days to pass before the cameras recorded any significant events, but I was shocked by the reality. Just half an hour after I left the apartment, the camera's motion sensor went off like crazy. At the very moment I was exiting the subway, standing in the middle of the station trying to comprehend the shocking scene unfolding on my phone. I thought it was my girlfriend who had triggered the motion sensor, but when I looked at my phone, I saw Patrick's presence on the screen. To my horror, he was already in my apartment, passionately kissing my girlfriend in the bustling living room. Commuters hurried by, not paying attention to the heartbreaking scene I was witnessing, and I stood there in complete bewilderment. Then it dawned on me that Patrick must have been hiding nearby, patiently waiting for me to leave for work, my girlfriend standing there completely naked with only a white towel draped over her head. I was at a loss, unable to comprehend the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. As I weaved my way through the crowd, my legs grew weaker and I had to find a seat. Finally I had to find a seat at the nearest station. To my amazement, they began to engage in sexual acts right on the couch in my living room. I was both surprised and mesmerized by their ease and comfort. It was obvious that this affair had been going on for a long time. Unbeknownst to me, the realization that I was late for work suddenly hit me, yet I felt a strange indifference. A strange indifference. It seemed that at that moment my life had lost all meaning. Everything I once valued was shattered. And I felt utterly defeated. The anger within me reached a boiling point, and I was overwhelmed by an irresistible desire to take revenge on these two individuals. I was annoyed by his interruption, but he questioned my tardiness and warned me of possible consequences if I didn't arrive within 30 minutes. This skepticism and anger led me to impulsively quit my job and abruptly end the call when my supervisor tried to contact me again. I could not believe her audacity. As I continued on the subway, I could not shake the feeling of betrayal and regret that washed over me. My friend, whom I trusted and loved, had betrayed me in the most terrible way. The thought that she had gone to work as usual that morning filled me with a bitter mixture of anger and disappointment. It was a stark reminder of my own ignorance, my failure to see the truth unfolding right before my eyes. The minutes of pacing and adrenaline that had fueled my impulsive resignation began to dissipate, replaced by a wave of regret and self-doubt. I couldn't help but chastise myself for making such a hasty decision. I suddenly realized how important my job was to me. Deep down, I understood that it would be futile to seek my old position back. The damage had been done and it seemed too late to salvage what I had lost. The weight of my mistake weighed heavily on me during that lonely subway ride. Before this incident, I had always seen my girlfriend as loyal and devoted. The idea that she might betray me had never crossed my mind, and now I had to face the painful truth that she was having an affair with a man I considered my friend. Disbelief and heartbreak intertwined, making that subway ride the saddest of my life. I had always shown kindness to these people, repeatedly offering my help even when his family rejected him. I had shown understanding, but in return my girlfriend and my friend treated me cruelly. How could I trust a woman who was having an affair with my boyfriend? The idea of proposing to her on Valentine's Day when I returned to my apartment early in the morning around 8 a.m. seemed unthinkable. I took off my work clothes and collapsed on the bed crying like a helpless child. It felt like all my achievements had been wiped away and I was essentially starting from scratch. I was in a tough spot. I had lost my job and my girlfriend, and now I was unsure what to do when the lease on my apartment expired. Moving back in with my ex-girlfriend was not an option. Finding another job was a challenge, especially with so many candidates vying for the same positions. I had already informed my landlord of my intention to move out, and now I was in a state of limbo. although I briefly considered contacting my former employer. I was pretty sure I had already been fired. Even if I apologized, it seemed unlikely that it would salvage the situation with so many candidates interested in the job. Fortunately, Florida offered a glimmer of hope in the midst of my despair. He had previously offered me a driver's position, which I had declined due to my girlfriend's reluctance to leave New York, but now, desperate for a fresh start, I reached out to my boyfriend. Unfortunately, he didn't return my call, which prompted me to contact his wife, who played a major role in the business. When her husband was out of town, she informed me that there was a job opening and asked if I could come to Florida. I agreed and said that I could come the next day to see the place, so I planned to book a ticket to Florida. I currently had $3,500 in my bank account, and by returning the engagement ring today I would receive $4,500 in compensation, making a total of $8. As I contemplated my future, I began to feel a sense of optimism. The idea of leaving without informing my ex-girlfriend was becoming more and more appealing. I wondered if anyone could truly understand my dire situation. I received strong recommendations to follow this path. The main advice was to leave, endure the shocks, give up the desire for revenge, and disappear from her life completely. I had considered this idea for a while, but at first it seemed too simplistic. My anger towards her and her lover fueled my desire for revenge, but in the end I realized the most important aspect of this plan was to end it all and sever all ties with her. My disappearing act was tied to her repeated attempts to contact me, and I longed for it all to be over. I wanted to see her reaction in person. Surprisingly, the guys involved also longed for closure. I spent the entire day alone in my apartment, which gave me ample time to contemplate the actions of both my girlfriend and the former boyfriend who had turned out to be my roommate. When I returned home that evening, I could hardly resist the urge to argue with her. In my eyes, she seemed vicious, mean, and evil. I could not fathom her motives for such treachery, and although I had lost all affection and desire for her, I decided to maintain a facade of indifference, pretending to be unaware of anything as we lay together that night. It occurred to me that perhaps this affair had begun only a week after his arrival, and I wondered if it was a means of humiliating and disgracing me. Perhaps she was intrigued by being with a man of another race, like indulging in forbidden fruit or conducting an experiment. I suggested that she sign a lease for an apartment in my absence, assuring her that I would sign an addendum upon my return. The rental company had already checked our credit, and our combined income was sufficient for the apartment, so she agreed to the plan. The thought of her infidelity in my own bed while I was at work sickened me. It was disturbing to realize that my girlfriend was most interested in the timing of my flight, presumably to inform her lover of the ideal time for their rendezvous. I couldn't help but wonder how long she intended to continue this affair now that I had proposed to her once. I contemplated the future. Would our story continue in our new apartment? Would it continue after marriage and the formation of a family? These thoughts made me grateful that I wouldn't be around for these significant moments. Feeling despondent, I decided to create some distance from her. The next morning, at some distance from her, I told her I had to leave early, even though I had moved the camera the day before to get a better view of our living room and bedroom. I made sure to save a video recording of her activities on a portable hard drive. It was almost predictable that as soon as I left the apartment, Patrick, her partner in the affair, wasted no time in putting her actions into a routine. Fortunately, a strategically placed hidden camera managed to capture her facial expressions, her loud and obnoxious screams, and even her intimate moments. What surprised me most was their complete disregard for protection. It was reckless of them to put my health at such risk. In addition, Patrick had recently been released from prison, and I couldn't help but wonder what diseases he might have picked up there. In my unstable situation, I was worried about potential health risks, especially with regard to STDs. With that in mind, I made a mental note to get tested when I arrived in Florida. Fortunately, I already had a CDL, so all I needed was additional training to improve my skills. Although it won't be easy driving across the country, I really enjoy being behind the wheel, and the pay is almost 3 times what I used to make, plus I dream of owning a big house in Florida with a big backyard. That kind of property doesn't come cheap, so even though I'm not sure about the exact date of my trip, I have plenty of time to think about my next steps. Maybe I should take the advice of my friend's father and go back to school once I've saved up enough for tuition. I have video recordings of those 2 days when something unexpected happened, and I have saved those recordings on my portable hard drive. The hidden camera I used is motion activated, meaning it only records when motion is detected. The camera's memory was sufficient to record until I returned from my 4-day trip to Florida. Upon arriving in Florida in the evening, I discovered that my friend had left to make deliveries and decided to take a cab to his house. To my surprise, his wife was home, my friend and his family live in a magnificent Florida residence, and seeing their prosperity filled me with joy. We grew up together in Queen, so their success seemed even more remarkable when compared to my small home. Remarkable, comparing their large home to my small New York apartment could not help but seem comical, yet I felt optimistic about starting this new chapter of my life in this place. During our conversation, my friend expressed strong disapproval of Patrick, whom he had warned me to stay away from many years ago. Unfortunately, I did not heed his advice. Ironically, I am now grateful to Patrick for exposing my friend's true nature. Had it not been for him, someone else might have uncovered her deception. Who knows, it could have been another person of African descent. While visiting my friend in Florida, I decided to review the footage from my camera that evening. To my utter shock, I saw Patrick in my home, eating my food, occupying my bed, and engaging in intimate activities with my girlfriend on the same bed. The depth of this betrayal became unbearable. Initially, I had planned to address it with her after she moved to a new apartment, but witnessing this blatant lack of respect in my own bed pushed me over the edge. However, I realized that taking matters into my own hands would lead to negative consequences. The thought of revenge crossed my mind, but I quickly realized the potential consequences, such as ending up in jail for a significant portion of my life. The next day, I decided to contact her father and give him the keys to my apartment. I began making duplicate keys to my apartment, and the next morning I saved and transferred the recording of their intimate encounter to a thumb drive, which I sent to her father via express mail that same day. At first I considered contacting her father directly, but I lacked his contact information. Then I searched for him on the college's website, but only found the number for his office. I explained that she had asked me to accompany her on a trip to visit relatives, emphasizing that we were not romantically involved, just friends with benefits. I was one of her many lovers, the person she was living with and using illegal substances. I informed him that as a gesture of goodwill I had made copies of her apartment keys and suggested that he visit her at 8 p.m. The optimal time. I deliberately did not mention the existence of the video recordings because I did not know how to explain this aspect to him after our telephone conversation. I assumed that he might be shocked by the unexpected information I had shared with him and was waiting for the inevitable consequences, or that he might suspect it was a hoax, although I strongly doubted it, perhaps because of the extensive information I had provided. Believe me, though, I wasn't sure if everything was going to go according to plan, so while I went about my own business, I took the opportunity to familiarize myself with the upcoming living arrangements. My friend's wife kindly briefed me on how her business worked, essentially bringing me up to speed. Late in the afternoon, my friend returned, and his family and I went out to dinner. So as not to draw attention to my own situation, I decided to discreetly check the camera while having dinner with my friend and his family. Given the sensitive nature of this story, I did not immediately share it with my friend as I left the restaurant. I was expecting my revenge on my unfaithful partner, but to my amazement, her father arrived at my apartment unexpectedly, accompanied by 3 young men of about 25 years of age. I assumed they were either his sons or their friends. I mentally replayed the scenario. They seemed surprised as they entered the living room, my ex-girlfriend and her lover. My ex-girlfriend and her lover were engrossed in watching television, but their peaceful moment was shattered when her father and several men entered the room. Patrick, in a t-shirt, appeared confused and my ex-girlfriend hurriedly tried to cover herself, remaining in her underwear. Her father began to scold her, expressing his disappointment in her lies about her boyfriend. At that tense moment, it seemed to me that I was foolishly hoping for a different outcome, perhaps wishing that the situation could be resolved without resorting to physical measures. However, my ex-girlfriend did not get a chance to express her thoughts. Her father categorically prevented her from doing so and showered Patrick with demeaning insults, some too offensive to repeat. I watched the bewildered look on her face as her father accused her of betraying her family and demanded an explanation for her actions. Her reaction was priceless. Her father's frustrated, angry, and arrogant demeanor was incredibly satisfying to watch. It was hard to bear to see a beloved child involved in something he despised. Her father relentlessly scolded her, hurled demeaning insults at Patrick, and seemed ready for a confrontation with the 3 men accompanying him. It was clear that he had anticipated Patrick's involvement. It's no wonder he was prepared for any outcome. However, at the first opportunity, Patrick hastily retreated, leaving my ex-girlfriend alone. Most remarkably, I videotaped the entire incident. After her father's departure, she was left in a state of shock and isolation, overwhelmed with emotion. She called me with tears in her eyes, anxiously asking when I would return. Little did she know that I had orchestrated this entire scenario, that the bond between father and daughter had been broken forever, that their relationship would never be the same, and that she had only me to blame for these irreversible changes. During our phone conversation, she expressed a desire to confess something that she could not discuss over the phone. I tried to comfort her, urging her to stop crying and assuring her that I would be back in 2 days to listen to her problems. To my surprise, the next morning she did not invite Patrick for another intimate meeting. It seemed the fun had suddenly ended. As I later learned, it turned out she had no way of contacting him. Despite this, I could not help but grin because she had brought this situation upon herself. Now she would have to face the consequences of her actions. Later that day I received the results of an STD test which came back negative. It was on the day I was supposed to fly back to New York that she finally agreed to talk to me. She called me and admitted her infidelity. I realized she had put it all together. She mentioned that I had gone to extreme lengths to secretly record and destroy her family, which she felt was unnecessary. I explained how she had ruined my life, especially since I was about to get married. She somehow managed to find 2 hidden recording devices and threatened me with a lawsuit upon my return to New York. As an excuse for her infidelity, she simply attributed it to a desire for intimacy, suggesting that Patrick was not important to her at all. The way she spoke suggested an attempt to downplay the seriousness of the situation. It seemed as if she expected me to just move on. I made it clear that our relationship was over, that everything between us was finished, and that I intended to return to New York, collect my belongings, and then move to Florida. In response, she threatened legal action for invasion of privacy and creating adult content out of revenge. I stood my ground and told her to go to hell. My only regret is that I didn't give her a chance to explain herself. I'm curious to know how her relationship with Patrick began. From what I can gather, it probably started about a week after he moved in. It would be interesting to hear the story from her perspective. I now live in Florida, where I work in car transportation throughout the southern regions of the country with occasional stops in the north. The latest news from my ex-girlfriend reveals that she has a new boyfriend. The latest news about my ex-girlfriend is that she has finally found a new roommate. Her relationship with her father has completely disintegrated as he wants nothing to do with her. As for Patrick, his whereabouts are unknown. To be honest, I don't know, nor do I care about his fate. What matters is that I have learned that things turned out terribly for my ex-girlfriend after my revenge. After my revenge and the strained relationship with her family, she suffered from severe stress and developed psoriasis. Her body and face were covered with painful rashes, causing not only discomfort but also a loss of self-esteem. Once a beautiful girl, she now goes unnoticed by men, and I can't find it in me to feel sorry for her, considering the pain and suffering she has caused me.